Let me tell you something real today, because sometimes the truth doesn't come dressed up nice. It comes wrapped in a sentence you've heard 100 times and ignored. If a man ever looks at you and says, "You're just overthinking," it's nothing. Those 6 words should stop you cold. I'm not saying convict him without evidence, but I am saying pay attention. A man who is honest doesn't need to shut down your instincts. He doesn't need to make you feel crazy for asking simple questions. When someone is clean, clarity comes easy. When someone is dirty, confusion becomes their favorite tool. Let me slow this thing down and really walk you through this, because words will always tell on a man before his actions ever do. People think cheating gets exposed by catching messages or seeing lipstick on a collar, but most of the time it shows up way earlier than that. It shows up in the way a man talks to you. The language changes first, the tone shifts first, the patience disappears first. A man who is doing right doesn't stumble over honesty. Truth doesn't confuse him, it flows. When a man is solid, his words line up with his behavior, and you never have to replay conversations in your head trying to decode what he meant. When a man starts saying things that make you doubt your own thoughts, that's not accidental, that's strategy. Words like "you're overthinking," "it's not that deep," or "it's nothing," are not meant to calm you, they are meant to shut you down. A faithful man doesn't fear questions. He welcomes them because he has nothing to hide. He understands that reassurance is part of responsibility. When a man is cheating, his words become defensive, dismissive, and short. He wants the conversation to end before it goes somewhere he can't control. Pay attention to how often his words create confusion instead of clarity. Love is not confusing. People make it confusing when they don't want to be fully seen. If every time you ask a reasonable question, you're met with irritation, sarcasm, or silence, that's a message. Men talk themselves into trouble all the time because lies require maintenance. Truth doesn't. When a man is lying, he has to remember what he said yesterday, last week, last month. That pressure leaks into his language. He becomes vague. He avoids details. He rushes conversations. He acts like your curiosity is an inconvenience. Here's something you need to understand deeply. A man who respects you will never make you feel small for wanting clarity. He knows that trust is built through communication, not avoidance. A man who is cheating needs you quiet. He needs you doubting yourself more than you doubt him. That's why his words start attacking your confidence instead of addressing the issue. He's not answering the question. He's questioning your right to ask it. Words are powerful because they reveal intention. When a man keeps saying things that minimize your feelings, he's telling you that his comfort matters more than your peace. And cheating always lives where selfishness is comfortable. A man who is faithful thinks about impact. A man who is cheating thinks about escape. Listen closely to how fast he tries to change the subject, how often he turns things around on you, how quickly he becomes the victim when you simply want honesty. You don't need proof to trust your intuition. Your intuition is reacting to patterns, not paranoia. It's picking up on tone, timing, and energy. When words don't match actions, your spirit notices even if your heart wants to ignore it. That's why you feel uneasy even when nothing is technically wrong. Words are energy, and when that energy shifts, it's because something behind the scenes has already shifted too. A man who is doing right doesn't hide behind language. He uses it to build trust, not destroy it. He doesn't confuse you, rush you, or silence you. He explains himself because he values the connection. When words start feeling like weapons instead of reassurance, that's when you need to stop listening to excuses and start listening to what's really being said. Let me tell you something important. Because charm has fooled a lot of people who ignored consistency. A man can sound good, look good, and say all the right things If his words don't stay the same over time, that charm is just a distraction. Consistency is the real evidence of character. Anybody can be impressive for a moment. Anybody can show up strong when it benefits them. But a man who is honest shows up the same way on good days, bad days, busy days, and quiet days. When cheating enters the picture, consistency is the first thing to fall apart. At the beginning, everything feels smooth. He texts fast, calls regularly, explains things clearly, and makes you feel secure. Then slowly, the rhythm changes. Not all at once, but just enough for you to feel it. The man who used to check in now disappears and reappears with excuses. The man who used to explain now expects you to just accept. And when you notice the difference, he leans on charm to cover it up. He jokes, he flatters, he distracts. But charm without consistency is manipulation. A faithful man doesn't rely on charm to keep you comfortable. He relies on reliability. You don't have to guess where you stand. You don't have to wonder why today feels different from yesterday. When a man is cheating, his behavior becomes situational. He's warm when it's convenient and distant when it's risky. His words change based on who's around and what he's trying to protect. That's why inconsistency should never be ignored. It's not mood swings, it's pressure leaking through behavior. Listen closely to this part. When a man is consistent, you don't need reminders. You don't need explanations. You don't need reassurance speeches. His actions do the talking. But when a man is cheating, he replaces consistency with charm. He thinks being smooth can make up for being unreliable. He thinks saying the right thing in the moment will erase the pattern you're noticing. That's why he gets uncomfortable when you point out changes. Consistency exposes lies. Charm only distracts from them. Another thing people miss is how inconsistency affects your peace. You start adjusting yourself. You start watching what you say. You start timing conversations. That's not love, that's adaptation to uncertainty. A man who is solid creates emotional safety. A man who is cheating creates emotional tension. You feel like you're always one question away from an argument. That tension isn't accidental. It comes from his fear of being exposed, not from your curiosity. Consistency also shows in accountability. A man who is doing right doesn't mind being predictable because predictability builds trust. A man who is cheating hates predictability because it limits his freedom. That's why his schedule suddenly becomes flexible, unclear, constantly changing. And when you notice, he acts like you're being dramatic. But consistency doesn't require defending, it just exists. Charm fades when pressure shows up, real character doesn't. When life gets stressful, a faithful man may be tired, but he's still present. A cheating man becomes unreachable. That difference matters. Anyone can perform when things are easy. Integrity shows up when things are inconvenient. If a man's effort disappears the moment it requires discipline, that tells you everything you need to know. So when you're listening to a man, don't just hear what he says today. Listen to whether he says the same thing tomorrow. Watch whether his tone, effort, and energy stay aligned. Consistency is not loud, but it is honest. And the moment charm starts working overtime to explain inconsistency, that's when the truth is already trying to get your attention. Let me explain something that a lot of people learn the hard way because excuses sound harmless until you realize what they're really doing. An excuse is not just a reason, it's a cover. When a man starts explaining instead of being transparent, when every simple question turns into a long story, you're not hearing honesty anymore. You're hearing damage control. A man who is doing right doesn't need rehearsed answers. He doesn't need to talk in circles. The truth is simple, and simplicity doesn't require defense. Excuses become confessions when they show up too fast. You didn't even accuse him yet, and he's already defensive. You asked one calm question, and suddenly you're getting 10 reasons, 5 explanations, and a tone that feels tense. That's not confidence, that's fear. When a man is cheating, he's always one sentence away from being exposed, so his mouth moves faster than his mind. He overexplains because he's trying to stay ahead of the truth. Pay attention to how his excuses shift. One day it's work, the next day it's stress, the next day it's your imagination. The story keeps changing, but the outcome stays the same. You're left confused and unsatisfied. A faithful man doesn't need new excuses for the same behavior. He fixes the behavior. That's the difference. Excuses are cheaper than change, and a cheating man will always choose the cheaper option. Here's where people get trapped. They start believing the excuse because they want peace more than truth. They tell themselves he's tired, he's busy, he's going through something. But notice how his excuses always protect him and cost you. You're the one waiting. You're the one adjusting. You're the one swallowing discomfort just to keep things calm. That imbalance is not accidental. That's someone choosing convenience over commitment. Another sign is when his excuses turn into blame. Somehow the reason he's distant becomes your tone, your timing, your questions. Now his behavior isn't the issue, your reaction is. That's a classic move. When a man can't defend what he's doing, he attacks how you're feeling. Excuses become weapons when accountability gets too close. A man who is honest doesn't need to flip the script. He stays on topic because he has nothing to hide. Listen carefully to the emotional weight of his excuses. Do they bring relief? Do they bring more questions? Truth settles you. Lies drain you. If every explanation leaves you feeling uneasy, that's because your spirit knows it's being fed half answers. Excuses are designed to end conversations, not solve problems. And when someone keeps trying to end the conversation instead of fixing the issue, that tells you where their priorities are. A man who values you understands that reassurance is not a burden. He doesn't make you feel guilty for wanting clarity. A cheating man treats reassurance like a chore. He sighs, gets annoyed, and acts like you're asking for too much. That reaction alone is an answer. When love is real, care comes naturally. When love is divided, patience runs out fast. Excuses don't mean he's a bad talker. They mean he's avoiding the truth. And avoidance is a decision. You don't need to argue with excuses. You don't need to investigate them. You just need to recognize the pattern. Because when excuses show up consistently, honesty has already left the room. Let me say this as clearly as I can, because this is where a lot of people get confused and start making excuses for behavior that should never be explained away. A man who truly values you will always value clarity. He won't leave you guessing, assuming, or filling in blanks with anxiety. Clarity is not extra effort for a man who is serious. It's natural. When a man cares, he wants you to feel secure, not uncertain. He wants you to understand where you stand, not question your place in his life. Confusion is not a normal part of love. People like to say relationships are complicated, but that's only true when someone is being dishonest or undecided. A man who is solid knows that clarity builds trust, and trust builds peace. He doesn't speak in riddles. He doesn't dodge simple questions. He doesn't disappear and then expect you to be okay with vague explanations. When a man values you, he respects your mind and your emotions enough to be clear. Watch how a man responds when you ask for understanding. Not an argument, not a demand, just understanding. Does he explain calmly or does he act irritated? Does he answer directly or does he dance around the question? A man who is doing right doesn't get offended by clarity because clarity protects the relationship. A man who is cheating sees clarity as a threat because clarity shines light on things he's trying to keep hidden. Here's something important. When a man values you, he doesn't rush conversations that matter. He doesn't make you feel like you're asking for too much just because you want to know what's going on. He understands that your peace matters. But when a man stops valuing clarity, everything becomes foggy. Plans are uncertain. Words are vague. Promises sound nice but lack detail. That's not accidental. Vagueness gives him room to move without being held accountable. A man who values you wants to be understood. He doesn't want misunderstandings because misunderstandings create distance. So he clears things up before they grow into problems. But a man who is cheating benefits from confusion. If you don't know what's happening, you can't challenge it. If you're unsure, you're easier to manage. That's why clarity disappears when dishonesty enters the picture. Pay attention to how often you feel the need to ask the same questions. Repetition is a sign that clarity is missing. A faithful man doesn't make you ask twice. He gets it the first time because he listens. He cares enough to make sure you feel settled. When a man keeps things unclear, it's usually because clarity would force him to make a choice he's avoiding. Another thing people miss is how clarity shows respect. When a man explains himself without being defensive, he's showing you that you matter. When he communicates openly, he's showing you that your trust is important. But when he withholds information, changes stories, or avoids direct answers, that's disrespect, no matter how softly it's delivered. Disrespect doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it comes disguised as silence. You should never feel guilty for wanting clarity. Wanting clarity doesn't mean you're insecure. It means you're aware. A man who values you won't label your need for understanding as drama. He won't minimize your concerns. He will meet you where you are and make sure you feel confident in the connection. Because when a man is serious, he doesn't want you doubting him. He wants you trusting him. Clarity creates safety. Safety creates loyalty. And a man who understands that will never risk losing you over secrecy. When clarity is missing, it's not because you're asking the wrong questions. It's because the answers would reveal something he doesn't want you to see. Let me tell you something real, because silence is loud when it comes from the wrong place. People think silence means peace, maturity, or strength. That's not always true. Sometimes silence is a shield. Sometimes it's a hiding place. A man who values you does not use silence to avoid responsibility. He uses communication to protect the connection. When silence starts showing up where conversation used to live, that's not growth, that's distance. A faithful man understands that presence matters. Even when he's tired, even when he's stressed, he doesn't disappear emotionally. He may need space, but he explains it. He doesn't leave you guessing, wondering, or filling in the blanks with anxiety. Silence without explanation is not calm, it's careless. And a man who cares is never careless with your peace. Pay attention to when the silence appears. It often shows up after questions, not after conflict. You ask something simple, something reasonable, and suddenly he goes quiet. That's not coincidence. That's avoidance. Silence becomes a tool when a man doesn't want to answer honestly. Instead of lying out loud, he says nothing and lets time do the work. He hopes you'll get tired of waiting. He hopes you'll stop asking. That's not love, that's control. Here's the part people overlook. Silence shifts the power. When a man goes quiet, you start adjusting. You replay conversations. You second-guess your tone. You wonder if you ask too much. Meanwhile, he sits comfortable, untouched by the emotional weight you're carrying. A man who is doing right doesn't put you in that position. He doesn't make you work for reassurance. He understands that reassurance is part of responsibility. Silence also protects double lives. You can't catch inconsistencies if there are no words to compare. You can't hold someone accountable if they refuse to engage. That's why silence is so attractive to someone who's hiding something. Talking requires alignment. Silence allows separation. When a man is cheating, silence gives him room to move without explaining himself. Notice how the silence is selective. He's quiet with you, but not with others. He's unreachable at certain times, but active elsewhere. That's not being busy, that's being unavailable by choice. A man who values you doesn't make you compete with uncertainty. He doesn't leave you feeling like access to him is a privilege you have to earn. Another thing silence does is dull your instincts. Over time, you start normalizing the absence. You tell yourself this is just how he is. But that quiet discomfort you feel is your intuition asking for clarity. Silence shouldn't make you anxious. When it does, it's because something is being withheld. Peace doesn't require effort to maintain. Confusion does. A man who respects you speaks up even when it's uncomfortable. He doesn't disappear when accountability shows up. He doesn't punish you with quiet moments for wanting understanding. Silence used as a response is emotional withdrawal, and withdrawal is a form of avoidance. Love doesn't avoid, it addresses. If you constantly feel like you're waiting, wondering, hoping for communication, that's information. You're not asking for too much. You're asking the wrong person. Silence tells the truth when words won't. And when someone chooses quiet over clarity again and again, they're telling you exactly how much access they're willing to give you. Let me say this in a way that really sits with you, because self-respect is the one thing that exposes everything a man is trying to hide. A man who respects himself will respect you without being reminded. You won't have to teach him how to treat you. You won't have to negotiate basic honesty. Self-respect changes the entire dynamic, because the moment you have it, games stop working on you. A man who is cheating depends on your tolerance. He studies what you allow, what you forgive, and what you explain away. If you excuse small things, he will test bigger ones. If you accept confusion, he will give you more of it, not because he hates you, but because he's comfortable. Cheating survives where standards are low and boundaries are unclear. The truth is, a man will only rise to the level you require, not the level you hope for. When you respect yourself, you don't chase clarity, you expect it. You don't beg for honesty, you assume it should already be there. That expectation alone makes dishonest men uncomfortable. They feel pressure around people who are grounded, because grounded people ask direct questions and don't accept vague answers. A man who is hiding something doesn't want to be around someone who sees clearly. Self-respect also changes how you respond. You stop arguing. You stop proving. You stop explaining why your feelings matter. You don't raise your voice or lower your standards. You simply observe. And observation is dangerous to someone who is lying, because patterns can't hide forever. The calmer you are, the louder the truth becomes. A man who is faithful feels safe around self-respect. He doesn't feel challenged or threatened by it. He appreciates it because it brings structure and trust into the relationship. But a man who is cheating feels exposed by it. He feels watched, not because you're controlling, but because you're aware. Awareness is not accusation, but to a dishonest man it feels the same. Another thing self-respect does is remove fear. You're no longer afraid of losing someone who is unsure about you. You're no longer afraid of being alone. And the moment fear leaves, manipulation loses its power. A cheating man relies on fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of starting over. When he senses you're not afraid, his behavior either changes or reveals itself completely. Self-respect doesn't mean you become cold or distant. It means you become clear. You say what you need once calmly. You don't repeat yourself 10 times. You don't chase explanations. You don't accept behavior that requires excuses. That calm firmness sends a message louder than any argument ever could. It says, I see what's happening, and I know my worth. Here's the part people miss. Self-respect doesn't force a man to cheat or stay faithful. It simply removes his ability to hide. When you stand firm, the truth has nowhere to go but out. And when the truth shows up, you're strong enough to handle it. because you were never depending on confusion to keep the connection alive. A man can lie to you, but he cannot lie around you when you respect yourself. Your standards become the mirror he sees himself in, and if he doesn't like what that mirror reflects, that's not your problem.